Good afternoon. Good afternoon. We've had a long day here in Los Angeles in November of 2017. And our focus on this concluding session today is investing in California's future. The panel descriptions of all our panelists are on the web. You can get a chance to look at them. You'll get a chance to meet each of them here over the next hour. So Melanie, let's start with you. Let's start with a topic that everyone cares about, and only 40 million citizens of California know the right answers to, and probably everyone around the world in their own parts of the world know the answer. When I moved my team from New York to California, and eventually 1,200 people over time, this was the key question: education. Where do my children go to school? What are the opportunities? And as we've worked at the Institute over the years to create economic development, try to bring jobs, not just to California, but to the city of Los Angeles or any particular area, this is a question that keeps coming up every time. Tell us a little bit about how you got interested in education and what you're doing in that area.
Thank you so much. And I'd also like to thank you, Mike, so much for focusing on this area. It is an area that is not focused a lot in conversation, and which is unfortunate because there's only one foundation to a house. And we seem to be putting up walls but forgetting about the foundation. And the foundation of everything is education. That is the common denominator to solving the economics, the poverty, careers, workforce. It's all about education. And I've always known that, but back in 2006, or 2007 actually, I had already looked for about 20 years to find an avenue to work with education, but in a different way. As a philanthropist, but we're looking for systemic change. We are systemically broken, and it's not enough to be putting Band-Aids on the symptoms of the problem. The problem has to be attacked directly. And so after looking 20 years, in 2007, came upon former Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa, who's also on the panel. And he had an initiative for doing something with education from a systemic standpoint. And I was very, very enthusiastic about this, as was my husband. It also represents a public-private partnership. The money is just not there in the state, particularly since Prop 13 and the fact that we're about 41 in funding in the entire United States of America. We're about number 41 in funding for education.
And that's funding per student?
Per student, per year, exactly. And so we decided to partner with the mayor. And I will say that people told Antonio that he was committing political suicide, and they told my husband, Richard, and myself that we were committing financial suicide. So neither suicide was good, but you know, it came down to, and I think for Antonio, came down to the same thing it came down to for us. Would we rather not do it and just feel like, well, you know, it's just too risky? We decided that the bottom line was we were only going to be unhappy if we didn't try. It's been 10 years now. It's been an enormous, enormous success. And from a philanthropic standpoint, like the gentleman up here on the stage, if you're serious about investing in California's future, the impact investing model should be used in deploying the philanthropic dollars for very strong results. The Partnership for Los Angeles Schools now has 18 schools in its network. We are not a charter school organization. We work from the bottom up and the inside out to make changes to the system itself. This could eventually become the national model of transformation. We are doing this for $675 per student per year in additional funding to what we receive from the state.
So to give people a little measure, you and your husband have committed about $200 million to this effort?
We've committed 50 the last 10 years. We just finished that pledge. We are doing another pledge next year.
So let me jump to the mayor here. So Mayor, I know this has been central to your view. And when we came and thought we were taking care of all the needs of the people we moved to the state, at the end of the day, we underestimated the importance to young families of education. And it eventually led, a couple years later, in 81, 82, to the formation of the Milken Family Foundation as we look at this issue. And I think one of the things we learn in philanthropy is that no good deed ever goes unpunished. We learn that. And we also learn if no one is objecting, then you're probably not doing anything productive.
No.
So the two of you met, and as you look back over decades here, what have you learned about education now?
Well, I've learned a lot. We've got a lot of work to do. When I became mayor, there was a 44% graduation rate. The town was fixated on the fact that I was the first. And what I said to this town was, the role of the first is not to bang on your chest and say how great I am. The role of the first is to open up the door for the rest. In LA, we had a 44% graduation rate. 1 out of 3 schools were failing. Out of the 700 plus schools that we had, only 89 of them were scoring at 800 and above when we measured schools. By the time we left, that 44% was 72%. It's 77%. The 1 out of 3 schools failing was 1 out of 10 schools failing, and the 89 schools was 260. The partnership schools that we took over, the 18 schools, it was 20 for a while, but the 18 schools that we took over, they had a 36% graduation rate. They now have an 81% graduation rate. When the numbers come out, we think it's going to be over 84. These kids can learn. And so what I've learned is we've got a lot of work to do, because at the state level, we have an 80% graduation rate, but for the 60% of the kids that are African American and Latino, they're graduating at 70%, and only 13% of them are going to a 4-year college, which is why by 2025 we'll be 1.5 million down in the number of college graduates we need, and 1 million down in the number of people with specialized skills. What I've learned is we've got to have a fierce urgency of now with respect to this issue. That means we've got to begin with early child education. I think you had a slide presented today that's the best bang for the buck. We spend more of our money in higher education, but the best bang for the buck is early child education, universal preschool, full-day kindergarten, because by the time they get to kindergarten, they're 3 million and 2 million, words down in terms of their vocabulary. So that's what I've learned. I've learned that at the state level, we're going to have to really double down on this issue of education so that we can grow together. 6th largest economy in the world, or 5th largest economy in the world. I just saw a new stat here.
Depends on how the dollar is moving.
Moving, right. So 5th largest economy of the world with the highest effective poverty rate in the United States. An economy the size of France, a poverty rate comparable to Romania.
So I think both of you have shown us what a public-private partnership can do. So Steve, let me go to you for a moment here, and then we're going to go over to Dominic. You were the Chief Financial Officer of the state of California. Before I put on your hat today running your group and investing in energy and technology and the future and how we're going to power, as the former Chief Financial Officer of the state, what do we need to do to invest in California's future?
So first, let me just say, every one of you should be proud This is the world's 6th largest economy. We're on a trajectory to pass the UK to be the world's 5th largest economy, and yet we have just over half the population of countries like France and England. That means, as a state, the average California is 2x as productive. That is an extraordinary thing. But to keep on that trajectory, we need to invest in 2 things. One, more in education, but there must be accountability, metrics, and that's true for teachers and schools. It's why I'm proud to be sitting next to Mayor Villaraigosa, because he and others here at Melanie have been leaders on this. Second, and I'm going to draw a very quick picture for you, this state needs to invest more in infrastructure. We saw the greatest growth in the state's history in the 60s because of a governor named Brown, not Jerry, Pat. The simple equation is this, remember it. This state spent roughly 25% on infrastructure, about 3 to 5% on social services. China, Korea, Japan followed it, and their economies went like that. Today we've inverted it. We spend well over 20% on social services, but about 4% on infrastructure. We need to get back to the game plan that made us successful, but that doesn't just mean investing in infrastructure of the past, which is roads, bridges, airports. It means thinking more broadly about what education for the future looks like. Think about autonomous vehicles. Think for darn sure about universal broadband to make sure every child in this state has access to the global economy. And third, start thinking about things like Hyperloop. We need to re-envision and redefine what infrastructure of the future means. That's where you see the biggest bang for our investment buck, in addition to education.
So as you transition, Steve, from our Chief Financial Officer of the state to the Wesley Group, let's talk a little bit about what the Wesley Group is doing.
First, it pays better than working in government.
Yes, it does.
We have built one of the larger sustainability, energy-focused venture firms in North America. And what I'd love to do is just show a quick slide or two, because the first thing is people say, my God, you know, clean tech, hasn't that all gone away? The reverse is true. We are moving, and in fact have already moved to an economy driven by renewables. Can you pull that one slide up?
Sure.
It's slide number 1, I believe. Somewhere there's a slide. Here's the slide.
Place to start.
Take a snapshot on this. On the top, make no mistake, regardless of what Mr. Trump might tell you. Here's what you need to know. The top line is solar. It is going down dramatically. It is today. This chart ends in 2015. Today, solar is cheaper than virtually every carbon fuel in the country. The world is moving that direction already. And everybody on the planet knows it, except for one small block on Pennsylvania Avenue. Keep in mind, for the last decade, we have closed down a coal plant in this country every 11 days. Can we go back just briefly? But the thing you need to know that's more important, and then I'll stop and turn it back to you, Mike, the missing part of this whole move towards a renaissance in renewable technology is storage has not been available. Because solar doesn't, sun doesn't shine every hour of the day, wind doesn't blow. You needed low-cost power storage. Here are the numbers you need to remember. For most of our lives, power storage is about $2,000 a kilowatt. It didn't make sense. By 2010, it had dropped to about $1,000 a kilowatt. This is about the time I was serving on the board at Tesla. That means you could make extraordinary electric vehicles for wealthy people. But today it's dropped from $1,000 a kilowatt down to $200. And if you see where we are today, we're getting close to about $170. What that means is that internal combustion vehicles can no longer compete. We are moving toward a world of all electric vehicles. If you'd asked Detroit, the heads of General Motors or Ford, you know, when will we see electrics? 3 years ago, they would have said, we might do some hybrids. 2 weeks ago, the head of General Motors said, we're moving all electric. This is stunning. Understand that part. California is leading the way through our companies and our government. That is part of the promise of how California is reshaping the global economy.
I think, Steve, you've pointed out something that I think is really important. And one of the cores at the Milken Institute is we're interested in data and we're interested in facts. And as we focused on this year, the issue is that economically, as Steve has pointed out, solar, wind, If we would have told you 10, 15 years ago the state with the most wind energy in the United States would be Texas, you would say impossible. Low-cost natural gas, largest reserves, but economically, this is what's occurring. And when you think about sequencing the human genome, it cost $3.8 billion. Then it went to $1 million. And today, $900 and probably $100 by 2019. So every single person before you're treated is going to get your human genome read and probably your microbiome, so we know who you are biologically and can have precision medicine. The same dropping is occurring here. So moving here from a couple thousand to 170 and someday at 100, it's going to change it. And if you step back and say, okay, who is going to be the leader in electric vehicles? It doesn't take a lot of thinking to think in the United States it's going to be California, but in the world it's going to be China. If you were the leader in China, you have no choice. You do not have any choice. They are building the equivalent of a football field of solar in China today every hour. Yeah. Every hour. Now, we had an environment. Do you want people in your capital wearing masks as they walk around? You can't run events where you shut down all the plants and all the equipment and tell cars they can't drive in order to put on the Olympics. It doesn't work long term. So it's obvious that they're going to drive their environment by eliminating the internal combustion engine first. And with that, we should recognize this is actually a strength for California. 25% of everyone of Asian ancestry in the United States, of all 50 states, 25% minimum live here in California. It's only a matter of time before 50% of the world's economy rest in Asia, where they have 60% of the world's people. And so this strong relationship we have with the second largest country in the world economically, China, and the geographic distribution and the fastest growing ethnic group here in California are people of Asian ancestry. Dominic, talk about the relationships between Asia, particularly China, and the US, and how you've positioned your own firm and bank to take advantage of that, and how we as a state can strengthen the state in the future by these relationships.
Well, Mike, you said it well. In fact, for my bank, if you look at it, it's called East-West Bank. So we, I've been the CEO for the last 26 years at East-West.
Half your life, Dominic, you've been a CEO.
There you go. I feel like it's almost like
30.
No, more than 50. Anyway, let's go back to East-West. We pride ourselves the bridge between the East and the West. It's connecting U.S. with the Greater China and Asia region, and apparently the formula is working really well. We went from a small little financial institution in LA and 20 some odd years ago, and then today we are the largest bank headquartered in Southern California. So thank you. Well, a lot has to do with a lot of banks went away because they got acquired.
Well, you had both things going for you, right?
But still, I think that it has a lot to do with, I think that it's not just sunshine and great weather of California that attract, the Asian investors coming to California. I think the social infrastructure, because having such a huge Chinese American population already living in California, and it obviously, with their social connection, it attracts many of them to come here. I mean, a good example is that Antonio's one of the key players to attract BYD, the electric battery company that make electric vehicles and so forth, to actually set up their headquarters in LA. I remember when I talked to their president, Stella Lee, several years ago, when she was trying to make a decision. She said PwC and Jones Lang LaSalle told her and her company that whether states like Tennessee or maybe Alabama, South Carolina, these are much more, like labor friendly or employers friendly, and they've cost of living is substantially lower, and there are less bureaucracy and regulations. She ought to really seriously looking in those places. In fact, most of these other companies in China, when they set up factory, they're all going out to the southeast region. She looked at me, she said, what do you think, Dominic? I trust what you tell me. I said, look, do you really want to live in Mobile, Alabama? And I think this is Southern California. The social infrastructure is in place, Chinese supermarket, financial institution. You want to watch, all the Chinese television show, just subscribe to the cable television, you see them all, Chinese newspaper. All of that, all the infrastructure in place, I said, if you don't need to hire anybody, if you don't need to transfer anybody from China, I think you absolutely should go to Tennessee. But if you need to send your engineers here, because quite frankly, like BYD have the incredible innovation on, develop the technology in batteries and so forth, and it is actually far in advance than the United States. And I say, if you need to have these scientists, research and development folks to come in and help these folks here in US, in Lancaster, to help them to get things going, then you need to make sure this is a place attractive enough for them to hang around here. And oftentimes, they all pick California. So from that respect, I think that what's really great going for California, it's not just that social infrastructure, because the Chinese Americans here, they can relate to these investors from China, but most importantly also, strategically, California is in high tech, clean tech, biotech. We're also in agriculture, and most importantly, content. When you talk about entertainment content, digital media content, California is the place that provide content to this world. So when China has 1.4 billion people who are developing better and better wealth for the last 20, 30 years.
The rise of the middle class
Exactly.
in China.
Mm-hmm. If you looked at, Deng Xiaoping since 1970s have started that, sort of experimental capitalism process, and then have lifted more than 600 million from severe poverty to now, middle class income folks who are out there traveling around the world and shopping in all those, Gucci and Coach, LV shops, So they're obviously creating.
Just so let's underline that for the group. The average tourist from China spends twice as much in the United States today as the tourists from Europe.
$7,000 per person. So it's like, if you look at Los Angeles, we have benefited tremendously. In fact, when we talk about trade deficits only count trade of goods. They never count trade of service. Mm-hmm. If you recall, if you look at California, we don't make any goods anymore. We mainly focus on services.
Well, Apple might disagree with that, I think.
Well, but that's another different issue.
They make them in Taiwan.
They make some of the parts here.
That's another different issue, because as a CPA, I'm really into accurate financial information. So in that regard, like if you look at an Apple computer, no, I shouldn't say computer, Apple iPhone, only 5% of the Apple iPhone is actually made in China. The rest of them came from Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Germany, of course, the United States. But the way that we account for trade deficit is that the last stop came from China, so the entire widget cost will be counted as that import coming from China. So that's what created this massive trade deficit. Apple alone account for $17 billion of trade deficit between US and China. But the fact is, only 5% of that 17 billion actually came from China.
All right,
But
well,
it's
we
poor
are
accounting.
lucky we've heard from our accountant on the panel here so far today, but I want to.
Can I touch on that? If there's any state that should be open to trade, global trade, it's this state. You know, we're the capital of the Pacific Rim. We have a border with Mexico and Latin America. Those are two of our, you know, China and Mexico are two of our biggest trading partners. So when you hear the noise from both Democrats and Republicans that somehow we shouldn't be in a TPP, that we ought to reject a NAFTA, no state would be hurt more than this state. When I brought Xi Jinping to Los Angeles, I brought him to Los Angeles for the following reasons. I said, we have the largest Chinese they were going to the Bay Area. And I said, why are you going to the Bay Area? And he says, well, they have a large Chinese population. I said, LA has a larger Chinese population than the whole Bay Area.
Antonio, let me just check.
Population.
Last time I checked, aren't you running for governor?
Yes, I am.
I am sure
but it was important.
You feel as strong about Northern
Now it's all California,
okay.
Right? But my point about that was, I'm speaking to the point that we move 44% of their goods. We're the #1 destination for their tourists. As you said, they spend double. How did we get there? In 2006, when we opened up a tourism office, we were getting about 175,000 tourists from China. By the time we opened the second one and I was leaving in office, we were getting about 650,000 tourists from China. We are connected to China, Mexico, and this entire Pacific Rim. Lastly, I want to say you asked a question. You said, who would have thought in 2012 that we would have been as focused as we are on climate change and particularly the green economy? Actually, this town did, just so that you understand. In 2005, we said we would make LA the cleanest, greenest big city in America. We signed on to Kyoto, #1 American city to reduce carbon emissions, #5 in the world. We made LA a clean tech capital of the United States as a result of those efforts. We signed agreements to get completely off of coal by 2025. You wouldn't know that because you didn't see that in the newspaper of record, but California, LA did this before AB 32, before SB 32, before all of the standards that they were setting. We were moving ahead. So in this discussion about where we need to be around a green economy and around climate change, the epicenter of that discussion was right here in LA, your town.
And in Northern California also, right?
In Northern California, of course.
So I think
here.
I think this is an important thing we should just spend a couple more minutes on as we think about investing in California. Whether it's the environment and technology through our leading universities in this state, whether it's going to be agriculture and what agriculture is going to be in the future, much of the new breakthroughs are in this state. A combination of the conservationist movement, environmentalist movement, and the nutrition and focused on what we're going to eat today from that standpoint, and at the same time saving water. So each of these issues are centered in the state. I'd like to switch, if we could here, to talk a little bit about healthcare. And today at this conference, on November 7th, 2017, here in Los Angeles, we presented some of the facts on obesity in America. And America is still the most obese country in the world. Less in California than the rest of the state, but the most obese. And we have, when we think about chronic disease, we pointed out that in chronic disease, between soft cost and hard cost, on just 7 chronic diseases, it costs the United States $3 trillion a year. And 41% of those costs are really attributed to obesity. So as we think about the opportunities to change the food chain as we know it today, and we think about the opportunities to deal with health and prevention, and we think about the cost of health care to the citizens of the state of California, this is a big issue. I'd like, if we could, to start with you again on this issue. As you focused on the kids and the education of the kids, how much has come into nutrition? Obviously, if I don't have enough food to eat, it's going to reduce the detrimentally my performance in school. How have you looked at the health care of the children in the schools?
Well, the programs that the government provides for the lunch and breakfast programs, for example, they were finding that, first of all, 4 generations of my family were educated in LAUSD and received a very good education.
You are a true native.
I am a
Because I know when I was moving people, if you were in LA for a week, you were considered a native.
I'm a 3rd generation Angelino. I am a real native.
So am I.
But we had nutrition courses in our schools, elementary all the way up. That's long gone. And of course, the food that has been served in the schools to the children is absolutely dreadful beyond belief, just dreadful. So LAUSD, working with the partnership and the LA Fund at the time, came up with a program, Breakfast in the Classroom, because children would have to come to school early to eat the breakfast before they went into the classroom. Well, they weren't getting there for various reasons, and the meals were prepared. It was costing the district a lot of money, and when the meals were not eaten, the federal government was not reimbursing the district. So we were leaving about $40 million on the table every year on the food. And so we decided that it should be breakfast in the classroom. And so now, in many of the schools, the children go down to the cafeteria, bring the meals back. They're packaged in containers. It's much, much healthier food. And the containers have a lot of nutritional facts about the food on the, around the container, printed on the container, but in a very colorful, childlike way. And as Mr. Baumer was saying this morning, you know, education is the propellant, but I just cannot for the life of me understand how people don't see that there's no brain food going into these children, and then we expect them to learn. And so there are nonprofits out there. One is Peer Health Exchange that we support and is coming into partnership schools now to help our students with better health. I have been trying to figure out for 10 years, unsuccessfully I might add, unfortunately, how to get dental care into our schools for our little kids. A lot of our absenteeism is because of dental problems, pain. Our children, if they're not healthy, they are not going to be able to learn. They have to have good nutrition, good health, enough sleep, or they're not going to be able to learn to the capacity that we know they can.
So you've been very focused on a nurturing environment.
Yes.
Many nonprofits like Communities in Schools have focused on bringing this in. And I just want to set this stage. Steve, I want to go to you in a minute here. We talk about technology and change, driverless cars, excuse me, media, dramatic change, the pressure on newspapers, etc. But we should all recognize this dramatic change that's about to occur in the entire agriculture, the growing of food, the creation of food, due to the ability to sequence your microbiome and your genome and see what you're eating and what it affects. Almost all the large consumer products companies in the world fully recognize this today. The largest of these companies is Nestle. And you might remember that Nestle picked a person to be their CEO in the last year that was not coming up through Nestle. They picked a person from healthcare to lead Nestle. And so Nestle announced, okay, we're going to be a healthy company. And on social media, they started ripping into Nestle. Yes, they're a 360 company. First they give you diabetes, and then they're going to be healthy.
I got to cure you.
Okay, 6 weeks ago, Nestle announced they're going to sell their chocolate division here. And so this movement has begun. Steve, I know you've been involved in some companies. Give us an example.
Well, again,
Our venture firm invests in companies that change the world. Things like Tesla. We've invested in a food company called Revolution Foods. And the simple fact is this country is too obese. As Michael pointed out, it's one of the biggest drags on our economy. The way to fix this is not when people are 30 or 40 years old. It's too late, patterns are set. You have to get young people. The best way to do that is in the schools. So we invested in a firm called Revolution Foods, founded by 2 women graduates of UC Berkeley, started out serving 8 primarily African-American schools in Oakland, California. Today, they serve over 2,000 schools in 26 states. Healthy foods. The challenge is not can you help the kids in Santa Monica or Beverly Hills or Palo Alto. It is can you get into the tougher districts, the places that can only subsist on the federally reimbursable rate costing lunches. That is what these 2 women have figured out how to do, is to put a healthy food on the table at roughly $3. They've become hugely successful. The firm should do close to $200 million in revenues next year. But the challenge is to go from the not-for-profit world to make it profitable, because that's when you can really explode the growth. That's what these 2 women have done, and you'll hear more about this company.
So a couple weeks ago in October 2017 in DC, we had a conference that you can watch on the web at themilkeninstitute.org on precision health. And you have the largest companies, PepsiCo, Nestle, Unilever there, but you also had 30 or 40 of these new companies using technology, most of which are headquartered in the state of California. Let's turn to even the bigger issue, Antonio. So, Mayor, we are focused on the cost of health care. It's obviously a debate that's going on today. How are we going to pay for health care? How are we going to deal with the cost of health care? We can have a substantial event measured in trillions of dollars if we can get people to eat healthy, take care of themselves. But right now, today, this is one of the central areas in our country. And I know there's a lot of debate of how it should be handled in California. What are your views on this subject?
Well, I think your point about prevention is an important one. Diet, nutrition. I've gone to more and more of a plant-based diet, primarily to be healthy. I want to be around for a long time. And with respect to health care and the cost of health care in the state, we're looking, if the Trump proposals, the Senate or House proposals, anywhere from 2 to even 5 million people currently on the ACA or on Medi-Cal could be without that health care. I think job number 1 is to make sure that we're protecting those people who are currently on health care. I believe that health care is a right, not a privilege, and and universal health care ought to be the goal. But with respect to protecting those people in a smaller universe, I think we're going to have to look at cost containment to a much greater degree, a public option, by being able to buy into Medi-Cal. I've taken on the notion of single payer, not because I don't think that government paid for health care may be the future. Certainly it's the present in many places around the world. There's a $400 billion price tag. Yeah. We have a $183 billion budget. The notion that we're going to get there, that everybody's going to be off of Medicare, veterans care, that your employer-based health care plan or Kaiser are just going to be gone overnight is a snake oil. And as I said in a debate, it's pie in the sky, and that's not going to put food on our table. So looking at cost containment, drug costs, I think, is something we're going to have to address. But you hit it on the head. Prevention, nutrition, these are key things that we should be looking at and using to drive down the cost of these chronic diseases that you had on one of these
Well, I know
slides.
You've kept yourself personally in good shape. Steve's been active. You've been active. How about yourself?
Not as
Not as much as you want.
much as I
Okay,
want.
next year we'll see our progress for you and me. But I think this is a key area that we want to focus on. And one of the interesting things when we talk about this, if you ever want to go to the Toronto airport, they have universal health care, and see all the people that are flying to India or other places in the world for health care. Yes, I can get my hip replacement free in Canada if I wait 2 years. So this issue is a complicated issue.
Yes, it is.
And it's been somewhat masked by the fact that these incremental costs that have occurred to us with this dramatic change of weight in America in just 25 years. And there's a lot of promise in front of us. You know, I'm not making any suggestions, but if you do visit California, you can go to Fat Burger today. There's 5 of them here that are serving impossible foods, plant-based. And in our taste test, people could not tell the difference between an Impossible Foods burger and In-N-Out Burger, the cult here in Southern California. So we have a lot to do here, and we have a lot of opportunity, and I want to switch a little bit to higher ed, if I could, just for a moment. In 1993, there were more professors and teaching assistants in the United States than college students in China. Today, there's multiple more college students in China than in the US. And we have been blessed in the state of California by having many of the greatest universities in the world here. If you look at the leading bioscience universities in the United States, half of them are in the state of California. If you look at the top 20 in the world, 6 of them are here in California. And if we think bioscience is going to drive this century and start thinking about what's going on at Stanford or Berkeley or UCSF or Caltech or UCLA or UC San Diego or USC, etc. How do you feel about higher ed? What are the challenges in front of us? Steve, you want to start us off there?
Well, first, if you're looking at what is going to continue to make this state great, it is our higher education system in concert with the influx of immigrants to our state. We are an immigrant state. That is what makes us the finest economy on the planet. I was lucky enough to serve on the faculty at Stanford's Graduate School of Business for 5 years. Now I run a venture firm. You would be fascinated to know that of all of the companies that go public in any given year, think eBay, think Google, I could go on and on, 1/2 of the companies that go public on NASDAQ today are taken public by immigrants. I don't want to be over political, but this is the secret sauce for us. And when you have a president of the United States saying we want to restrict the immigrant flow from countries with many of the best and brightest people, that would be a huge error. We need to get smart about how to bring more of the best and brightest people to UCLA, Caltech, USC, Stanford, and Berkeley. That is how we outpace the rest of the world.
Steve, I just want to reinforce your point here. In a recent survey in China, 41% of all the leading entrepreneurs and everyone worth more than $1.5 million US, if they could, would like to live in the United States.
Yeah.
And I know in one of our early child care centers at Cisco, just to give you an example, in Northern California, we had 400 children. More than 50% of those children had at least one parent that was born in India.
Yeah.
And so it has made a huge difference to our state. Let's talk, if you're talking about demographics, and Tony, I'd like to start with you. If we look at this state, we were the very first state where more than 50% of the children, the year 2000, were born of individuals of Latin American ancestry. If you're here in LA Unified in your schools, more than 70% of the kids in our public school system are of Latin American ancestry. And we have put up over the years, if you wanted to be in residential real estate in California, you better be able to speak Spanish or Chinese if you want to have a big future, in that we've gone from the Smiths and the Millers to every surname of the top 10 home builders in the state of California are either Asian surnames or Latin American surnames. So today the majority of people in the state of California are either of Latin American ancestry or Asian ancestry. Antonio, how do you see this issue? How do we keep our state together? And how do you see our relationships with Latin America, Mexico, et cetera, with this change here in California?
Another stat, well, first of all, 67% of LA comes from Asia, Africa, or Latin America. 44% foreign born. I think the number for the state is 34%. Yeah. You said it, it's not just in tech. There are a number of industries where immigrants and the foreign-born are, populated in great numbers. And
Agriculture, obviously, being one.
agriculture, service economy, construction, their hospitality. But, I think that's why when I shared the statistics about the 60% of our kids in our public schools, who, if you see one of these slides,
Which
kids
one
under
would you-
five, the kids under 5.
Let's put that slide up, because I think not only the people here in Los Angeles, but around the world, as you think about America today, would be really quite surprised about what percent of the population is of European ancestry under 5.
So 75% of the kids under 5 today are, from Asia, Africa, or Latin America. So when I gave that other statistic, that the 60% today that are in our schools that are graduating at 70%, and only 13% of them are going to college, that's why it should be important to all of us. I had a son that went to Princeton, a daughter that went to SC. All of us have kids that have gone to college. If we are not nurturing and developing these, investing in them from early child education, and you had another slide, that's where you get the greatest bang for the buck. I agree. We've got to do a lot more in higher education. But where are we going to get the bang for the buck in the future? Early child education, universal preschool. This is the key to making sure that we can graduate these kids, they can be college ready, and they can go to institution of higher learning. So while it's important
to reinforce the point Antonio is making here, $1 invested in a 5-year-old gets you the same results as the $3 invested in a 15, $5 at 21, and $10 at 30. And this is the work of a Nobel Prize winner, James Heckman, University of Chicago.
So I believe our path is we're going to chart a different path from the noise that you hear in Washington. We're going to show the world that you can come from every corner of the earth with your hopes and your dreams. You can make it no matter what your zip code is. But we've got a lot of work to make that happen.
I just want to go to Dominic for a moment. A few years ago, Dominic, I know you invited me to speak to the Chinese American Association, Business Association, and what struck me that night is if you were wearing a blindfold, you couldn't differentiate whether the people were Chinese Americans or Chinese nationals or had come from China or whether they had come from Scotland or the UK. They were talking about their college football teams and the competition today, and just how much a part of our society that group, one, how successful they were, and how much part of the society was.
Well, I think that obviously, folks that coming from all different parts of the world, including folks that are coming from Asia, they came to U.S. because they aspired to fulfill this American dreams. Mm-hmm. So they came to the United States because they want to be American citizens. So in that standpoint, I think California is an ideal melting pot that we have people coming from all different parts of the world. We have the largest Korean population, in LA outside of Korea. We have the largest, obviously Filipino population, largest Thai population, Persian population outside of those countries. And
probably the largest El Salvadorian, Nicaraguan, Honduras population.
Armenian, Persian, list goes on and on.
And I do feel that it is not at all an issue. Oftentimes people look at, the ethnic diversity will cause friction. I do feel that friction usually comes from financial challenge and also educational challenge. Mm-hmm. When you have challenge of finding good food and shelter, and the other way is that if you're not getting a proper education, oftentimes the ignorance will cause a lot more friction. But if people are well educated and we find ways to actually get good jobs, the dynamic change. And I do feel that, what we just talked about earlier from the biotech, the higher education, and high tech, clean tech, and all those things, and of course, Hollywood, with contents, barring Harvey Weinstein. All of those things are very, very exciting in terms of looking at the prosperity of California for many years to come. But I think the key issue, and that Melanie and Antonio talked about, and Steve also covered, is that if we do not take care of the educational challenges that we're facing, because yes, we have plenty of great universities here throughout California, but are the kids coming out from high school ready to go to these schools?
Right.
Even if we just say that, you know what, we're going to go through whatever allocation method that we do that push you guys up there. Say, shut out the out-of-state students, just give it all to Californians. If the kids in California from the high school are not well prepared, they can go to college. They're still not able to graduate. They're still not going to be able to get a good education. And that's, I'm just talking about right now, basic education. Getting a basic humanity degrees, getting a basic science or basic engineering degree. The challenge that will come, which will come very soon, that is that between US and China, artificial intelligence, robotics, is going to take away a lot of the jobs. We always used to worry about, if people, come out and not having a science or engineering major, how are they going to find jobs? I'm going to tell you right now, even the kids who graduate from Berkeley with an engineering degree may not get a job in the future because of the incredible advancement of robotics and artificial intelligence. So we're going to need to start looking at how the world's going to be like because of all the advancement of science, and then look at education. Are we properly educating our kids in the right way so that when they graduate from college, they actually can get a meaningful job and be sustainable as a professional?
I think, Dominic, that obviously leads into the entire theme this year for the global conference here in Los Angeles, but for the Milken Institute around the world, and that is building meaningful jobs. And Steve, I'm going to go to you right now, but I want to move. We've looked at energy, environment, food, health, agriculture, healthcare, education, infrastructure, immigration. I want to go to housing, and after you finish your point here. And so if you look at that Maslow's hierarchy of needs that we focus on how people feel they're going to have a meaningful life, and you start at the bottom of that pyramid, you see that bottom of the pyramid, one of the elements that makes that is, can you feed your family? Can you sustain your family? Can you provide basic necessities? And one of them is shelter. Okay, can we provide low-cost housing to such a large population in need of it where we have such high prices for housing? But Steve, I know you wanted to touch base. I'd like to now, after that, go a little bit to access to capital for housing. Let's get to the area you wanted to cover.
Good God, let me cover both quickly. First, I was born in Arcadia, and I want full credit for being an Angelino, but I flew in from Silicon Valley, where I live today, and I will just tell you, Dominic's absolutely right. There are going to be more jobs disintermediated in the next generation than you ever dreamed. The biggest, #1 occupation in the country today is driver. It spans everything from cab drivers to truck drivers,
so
3.7 million people. Those jobs are going away due to autonomous vehicles faster than you think. If you lived in Silicon Valley, as I do, you would see them on the road today, and they are coming fast. It is incumbent on government, if we want to keep California at the forefront, to be training our young people to be job ready in the future. 50 years ago, we did a pretty good job of teaching people Algebra 1, geometry, Algebra 2, trig, calculus. That probably sounds familiar. Biology, chemistry, physics. It's all great for the last century. For the next century, we need to be teaching app design, computer programming. It cannot start in college or even high school. It must start in grade school.
Robotics.
Universal pre-K, essential, but we need to give people the building blocks to do this. We can do this in California today, and I will tell you right now, no place is better prepared to be successful at training our kids to be job ready in the future than California. On the housing issue, I'm going to say something incredibly apolitical here. We underbuild in this state worse than any other state in the country. Flat out, we need to build more housing. Ironically, we restrict the housing that is built here for a number of reasons. The largest is NIMBYism. We need to be building more housing starting tomorrow. It puts people to work. It brings the cost of housing down. It gives people security. It anchors them here. There are common sense ways to do this, but it all starts with rezoning and having strict requirements that every community build their share of affordable housing.
Antonio?
You know, in the middle of the recession, when we were facing bankruptcy in this town, we put $100 million in the Housing Trust Fund. We leveraged $1 billion to build 20,000 units of housing in this city. The state has got to put a housing trust fund together that leverages tax credits, that brings back redevelopment. We lost $1 billion when the state was, balancing the budget on the backs of cities and counties. They took away $1 billion for housing and economic development in the middle of a recession. We're going to bring it back. We've got, you hit it right on the head. We're going to leverage and incentivize cities to put their own money up, like LA's doing, and San Francisco's doing, and Oakland's doing, and San Jose's doing. But they're going to have to do the following. They're going to have a plan for homeless housing, a plan for workforce housing, a plan for affordable housing, a plan for transit-oriented development. Of the according to McKinsey, the 3.5 million units of housing that we need in the state just to keep up 3.5, 1.2 million of it's going to come from transit-oriented development. And finally, we need to do the following. We've tried now a couple of times to do exactly what you said, to force those cities. There's been a lot of pushback. We've been unable to do that. What someone came up with, I think a great idea, we ought to have a cap and trade program by region. And if that city refuses to put up participate, put up their own money, if they're not incentivized by the state money that they could get, then they're going to have to put money in a kitty so that we can build that housing in the region. Those are concrete ideas. Some of them started here, but have come from other parts of the state as well. And I agree with you 100% that it's not just a crisis, it's a disaster, because the reason why we have the highest effective poverty rate in the United States, effective poverty rate, is because the cost of housing is put, everybody in the poorhouse.
All right, let me...
Oh, the last thing. We got to address our approval rating. Everybody, CEQA's broken. Anybody, the fact that I got a CEQA exemption for a football stadium. Why can't we get it for affordable housing? It costs too much. Yeah. It's too Byzantine. It takes too long. You can sue all the way. So that's the other thing they'll have to do to get state money. They're going to have to shorten that approval process.
All right. We're now going to move to what's commonly referred to as the lightning round. Okay, so we've covered a number of topics. We're now going to have short answers.
Okay.
And we're going to go from my left to the right. Okay, Dominic, how can public and private sectors work together more effectively?
I think that one thing that they can focus on maybe for California is on infrastructure. I think that the private sectors can offer a lot, in helping to build, the 21st century, California, and which obviously, many of our infrastructures are dated, in either the 19th and the 20th centuries. Is outdated, as Steve had talked about earlier. And this is, when it comes to infrastructure, obviously, it has to get into the public domain, but I'm very leery about having just public servants to do that kind of work. So having the two combined together, I think will be
Melanie,
great.
How can public and private sectors work together more effectively? What have you learned?
Learned a lot in the last 10 years, and in view of the fact that California is where it's at in per pupil funding per year for public school education, K through 12, it is important to do the public-private partnership to fill in the gaps. The gaps are numerous, and they really need to be filled in. And philanthropy has the opportunity to do that. But philanthropists have to recognize the systemic breakage that needs to be repaired and understand that it is about that impact investing. You're not going to get any more impact for your dollars than you will with education, because the students, once they're educated, I have one family in our schools, they have 3 children. Mom and dad never went past the 6th grade. The oldest child graduated summa cum laude in engineering from Harvard. Just recently, in June, graduated Stanford with his MBA. Middle sibling graduated from Cal State Long Beach and was student body vice president. Youngest member of the family is in his 3rd year at UC Berkeley in math.
We want everyone to have that opportunity.
That is the impact investing, and these kids were in our partnership schools as well. And we involve the parents very much. You have to involve the community, and more people have to have a dialogue and a discussion and stop forgetting about K through 12 public school education.
Okay, let's move. Steve? Public-private partnerships.
I've got some good news here. We're moving toward an era of big data. And what this means is we now have metrics for every provision of government services. Think about this. The reason we're moving toward autonomous vehicles is it essentially drops the cost by 50% of transporting goods or people. That makes our economy more effective. That's why we're moving that direction. Government will be under increasing pressure to be able to articulate to the public, here are the outputs we're getting in public education, here are the outputs we're getting for the roads we're building, the health services we provide. What government needs to do is pull people from the private sector in to help provide goods and services more cost effectively. With big data, for the first time, we can measure how we're doing. Now we just need to do it.
Antonio?
I think the area of infrastructure is, when I left the mayor's office, I went to the University of Virginia with Ray LaHood, and we looked at the issue of infrastructure and middle-class jobs. And a key area for us to really expand exponentially the investments that we need is public-private partnerships in infrastructure. So I agree with my friend Dominic over there.
All right, we're going to take our last question, kind of wrapping it up here. Dominic, we're going to start with you. If you had the ability to enact one major policy change, a new law or regulation, or stopping an existing one, what would you choose?
I like to have democracy to take a rest for 4 years, so that, and I will volunteer to be the CEO to run California at $1 a year. Now, I would only do that after Antonio completed his 2 terms.
I love him. I love him.
Okay. Melanie?
I would probably want to see something enacted that would show value for our teachers. We've talked about the high cost of homes, and our teacher salaries are dismal at best. And how can they come to California if they cannot afford to live here? And so I would like to see something enacted that would involve either free college if you're going to be a teacher, and then you must teach for 5 years, or something to do with housing. Because on top of the fact that they're coming out with into a profession that has very low salary, frequently they're coming out with student loans too. And they can't pay off the student loans and also afford a place to live. And so if we really want to get education where it needs to be, we have a real shortage of teachers in this country, and particularly in California, and it's getting worse. So if we would address the inequality, it would be very helpful to our system of education.
So Melanie, I don't know if you know, but many years ago, more than 30, we started this National Educator Award to honor the teachers, to stress the importance in their community. We now have 2,800, but one of the very first ones picked in the entire United States was an immigrant from Taiwan and China that changed the world for all of us, and I notice she's in the audience. Yvonne Chang, can you stand up? Yvonne has changed the world as the principal and educational area for her group and really made a change, and I don't think we recognize. I know at the Milk and Family Foundation over the last 35 years, the #1 factor after the parents of a child's success was the teacher in the classroom. So we thank you for that. Okay, Mayor, we're giving you a good opportunity here. You now have the ability for one major policy change. I know you want to make many. A new law or regulation or stopping an existing one. Which one would it be?
It would be to give every child in California the same opportunity to a great education that people with means and the affluent have, and it would start with early child education. I think we've got to ensure that these kids get the same shot that we did. We're the largest economy in the world. And
let's talk about your family. You had a son at Princeton, daughter at USC.
Daughter at FIT.
Tell us a little bit about your parents for one moment.
My father came from Mexico with a second-grade education, left when we were 5. My mom had a high school education, Catholic school education, but 1940s, father was older, Mexican-American, all you can do is get a job as a secretary, and she was a very talented lady. So we were lucky, but I was about to say,
I just wanted to give them a feeling that you are an example of the American dream.
Very much
a father with a second-grade education and a grandson that graduated from Princeton.
And we're 16th, according to the OECD, in where you start and where you end up. Mother Liberty, we've always thought of ourselves as #1. We're 16th today and going in the wrong direction. It has everything to do that we're not making the investments in these communities that have been left behind. So if I had a magic wand, every one of those kids would have the same shot at the dream that God gave me.
Steve?
2 things super quick. I want to see California be a global leader in developing a curriculum to the future to make sure our kids are job ready. We also have to provide the model for late in career training, because in the future you will not go to school once. You will need to be coming back every 5 or 10 years. We need to be providing micro degrees so we keep our people job ready for the future. No one is better prepared than we are. Second, there's one thing that we are known for, and that's innovation and technology, but we have actually been the innovators in reinventing democracy. When I was state controller, I crossed party lines, worked with this Austrian guy. We got these 2 things passed: open primary and universal third-party redistricting. If the rest of the country could do those 2 things, our Congress and our federal government would work better than any country on the planet. They should learn from California.
Thank you, Steve. So we've heard a lot of things that we need to do, and the exciting thing about California is they are doers. If you study history, almost 70% of everything that happens in the United States of America starts right here in the state of California. And we sometimes forget, Dominic and others have helped us remember, of this amazing state and this amazing country we're part of. The diversity of our population, the change of face in California peacefully that's occurred that almost any other country in the world could not achieve. So we thank you, and we look forward to a successful opportunity of investing in California's future. Thank you for joining us.